When detectives pressed play on a VHS tape they'd pulled from a dusty security camera, no one was prepared to see what they were about to witness. Three friends sat drinking champagne, laughing, and then two masked men burst into the scene and calmly and quietly executed them. This is Red Rum, stories about the true victims of crime. I upload on Mondays and Thursdays, so make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. Our case today takes place in 1994 in Miami. And when I think of Miami, I definitely think of like the CSI preened, glamorous version. And 1994, it really was the time when things were changing in Miami. There was more money, there were nice cars, skyscrapers going up, things really were shifting. It's undergone this transition from cocaine cowboys to more of the international commercial hub it has more recently become. And it's got a real Cuban influence as well. It's also where people go to get into show business. And our case today centers around three people. And one of those people is Sharon Lynn Anderson. Now, Sharon's sister Debbie has spoken extensively about the case. And so most of the information we have is from her point of view. So our case today really revolves around Sharon. Sharon and Debbie had grown up in Miami. And by 1994, Debbie was very, very pregnant, and she had actually moved out of Miami to go to college, and so she was kind of living her life a little while away from Sharon. Now, Sharon was still living in Miami. She was actually really interested in show business, and so she decided to audition for a kind of dinner theatre play. And she got the part, and she was very serious about it. The very next day from where our story begins, she had a very important dress rehearsal. And so she'd spent this entire day learning lines, going over things again and again. And it got into the evening and she's exhausted. She realizes actually there's no point in hammering these lines and continuing to do that. And so instead, she decides that she's going to take a break. She's going to call her best friend Marie and see if she wants to go out for the night. And so she picks up the phone, calls Marie, and Marie says, sure, yeah, I'm up for it. Shall we go to the place that we usually go, our local spot? It was called Casey's Nickelodeon Bar. She and Marie would drink there often, and they're both in their early to mid-20s. They are best friends. They have been for a long time. Marie's got a 3-year-old at home. Obviously, Sharon is wanting to do this play. She's wanting to start her career in showbiz and entertainment, anything like that. And so they've got a lot going for them. And on this one night, they just want to go out and have fun and enjoy their night. And so they get to the club or the bar, they go inside, they settle down at a table, and then a man comes over to them. The man, Casimir Scharsky, also known as Butch Casey, owned the bar, and he knew the girls because they came in quite often, they were regulars. And so he went over and was chatting to them. And soon enough, he learns that Sharon's got this big part in this play and she's really excited about it. And it's a pretty big deal. And so he says, come on guys, I will get us some champagne. We'll have a really good night. And Butch was really known as being like this to everyone. He was super personable. He was very friendly, and he really liked to kind of go the extra mile. Now, on top of this, it's reported that Butch could be questionable at some times. Maybe he had some links with drug gangs or just gangs in general, and he carried a lot of money around with him. Now, none of these claims are substantiated in terms of the gangs and drugs. The only claim that is substantiated is the one about money. He would carry wads of cash around, and I'm not just talking like a couple $100s. He would carry thousands of dollars around at a time. And that is kind of how the night progresses. Butch is treating them to champagne, the girls are having a nice time, and they continue on their night there. And then as the people kind of peter out, it gets a bit quieter, they decide to move to another bar. Now they get there, and again, it's quite quiet. I don't know, I guess it was maybe a weeknight, but it's not popping. It's not a poppin' Miami night. And so they decide they're gonna leave the bar and go back to Butch's for some drinks. And that is kind of where our story pauses, because the next thing we know for a fact that happens is the following day. And as I said, a lot of the information I got is from Debbie, Sharon's sister. So Debbie's at home and she gets a phone call from her mum. And her mum's worried because she was supposed to meet Sharon today for a movie date, but she never showed up. And this is concerning because Sharon is very reliable. If she wasn't going to be there, she would at least let her mum know. And she doesn't live far from her, so she could have just driven round or called her, whatever it might have been. Anyway, as time goes on, Sharon isn't at home, but they know that Sharon went out with her best friend Marie, and the families are close. So Sharon's mum calls Marie's mum and asks where her daughter is, if she's seen her. And that is when Marie's mum says no. And you know what? Marie never came home last night. I'm actually beginning to get a bit worried. Now, this is becoming extremely concerning for both families. And so they decide to call the police pretty much straight away, and they report their girls, adult women, but their children, as missing. Now, the police do take this seriously. They say, okay, well, look, we'll follow the trail of where they went. We know that they were with Butch the night before. There were witnesses who can talk about that. And so we'll head to the bar, head to Casey's Nickelodeon bar, and have a chat with the manager there and see if he knows where Butch is. So they arrive and they speak to the manager, and sure, the manager says, yeah, that happened. They actually ended up going on to another bar, but you know what? They might have ended up at Butch's house. It wasn't unheard of. He would take people around there all the time. They'd have drinks and then they'd end up leaving maybe 3, 4 in the morning. And so the police head round to Butch's known address. And as they're walking up to the front door, they notice that on the ground there is a blue T-shirt, just kind of scrumpled, almost discarded. And so they kind of walk past that, get up to the door, and they knock on. And they're thinking there must be someone inside because there is music blaring out. And at the same time, they're seeing their lights are on, which admittedly is a little bit weird because it's daytime in Miami, it's sunny outside. But even so, they kind of knock and wait, but there is no answer. So one of the officers thinks, right, well, I'll just go and have a look around, see if I can see through some of the windows. I think it was a bungalow building. It certainly looks like it from the crime scene images. And so the officer walks around the side of the house and peers in through another window. And that is when he sees on the floor, there are 3 people and they are surrounded by pools of blood. As soon as the officers are able to force entry inside, they see that these 3 people are dead and have been dead for some time. And it is no surprise to the investigating officers when these 3 bodies are identified as Butch, Marie, and of course Sharon. Police obviously have to clear the space, they clear the house. They manage to do that, and then they start searching around for any kind of obvious evidence. And as they're doing that, one of the officers looks up and sees this clapperboard in the corner on top of a kind of unit. And as he looks behind that clapperboard, he sees that there is a CCTV, a security camera, facing into the area where the bodies were. Now, this is a huge moment, and I have to admit that I knew about this case. I've known about this case for a long time. And the reason that I remembered it was because of this. I think I saw this CCTV footage when I was maybe 15 years old, maybe a little older, but it stuck with me because it is so horrifying. We actually have a video of the crime as it's happening. Now, officers see this and they don't know this at the time. So they have a look at where the lead goes to. They see it goes to this VHS player. They pull out the VHS and then go and play it in another room so they can actually see what they have on camera. And it is unlike anything they have ever seen before. So you can see it is black and white footage. It's kind of grainy, but it's very clear that it is Sharon and Marie sitting at the table in the kind of living room area. And Butch is stood up. He's got his back to the camera. He's kind of facing outwards and he's talking to them, maybe telling them a story. He's very animated. They've all got champagne glasses in their hands. They're having a really nice time. And we see from the beginning of them entering the house, we see them do all of this, get sat down, get settled in. And it's about half an hour later when suddenly the front door bursts open and in walks a man disguised with a baseball cap and sunglasses, and he is holding a gun. And then another man follows in right behind him, and again he's disguised, but he's actually wearing a t-shirt that's like pulled up over his face. Feels very spur of the moment, very spontaneous, not very well thought out or necessarily well planned. But this man enters and he is not seemingly carrying a gun, certainly not that we can see at this point, but he is carrying a weapon. It looks like some kind of bat or pole. And as he enters in, obviously there is shock on the women's faces of what's going on. Now Marie is sat in her chair and Sharon runs through to the other room, to the kind of right of where the camera is facing. It's another bedroom. She runs through, but as she does that, the second man sees this happening and he runs straight after her and brings her back. Now, as Sharon is brought back into the room, Marie is pushed off of her chair by the other man, and then Butch is pushed to the ground and he is beaten savagely. He's beaten with the gun, he's beaten with fists, he's kicked. He suffers broken fingers, fractured ribs, broken teeth, and just a lot of cuts and bruises to his body. It's pretty savage. At the same time, the men start tying, well, they tie Sharon up, which with what at first seemed like a rope. Certainly on the tape, it looks like a rope, but they know from evidence they find later it's actually a phone cord. Again, very last minute, very spur of the moment, very unprepared. This goes on for around 25 minutes. I cannot imagine the level of fear these three people are going through. But then in the most shocking footage I have ever seen, the men go up to the three people lying on the ground, completely disarmed, completely unable to help themselves and also unable to identify the perpetrators because they are disguised up. The men then stand behind them and shoot at them, all three of them. And in fact, Butch is shot twice and the second shot kills him. And then Sharon. Now, Sharon has been shot through the right eye and she'd laid there for a little bit, but maybe because she was so stunned and so shocked, she is still alive, but she starts to get up, she starts to move. Maybe she's disoriented, she's trying to get sense of what has just happened. And as she does that, the man in the baseball cap and glasses realizes that she's still alive and so goes up to her and shoots her again, killing her instantly this time. It's at this point that that same man with the baseball cap, he realizes that Marie, the other woman, isn't dead either. And actually all of his shots the first time missed her. So he decides to go up to her and shoot her point blank range. And he shoots her where the spine connects to the neck, which is instantly fatal. And then the idiots at this point, so the three people are dead. Obviously they wouldn't have been able to identify them anyway, but they are dead. And so one of the men turns around, he's sort of facing the camera's way, and then he takes off his disguise. Obviously, he's not aware that there is a camera there. It was hidden behind that clapperboard. So he doesn't know that the camera's there, but now he's taken off his disguise. And the footage is grainy, it is black and white, but we do finally have a snapshot image of at least one of the perpetrators' faces. Officers do door-to-door inquiries after this. They're asking neighbours if they saw or heard anything suspicious or anything out of the ordinary. And they don't get a huge amount. Mostly people didn't hear or see anything. But then they do get something from a man called Gary. Now, Gary tells them that actually, yeah, he did see something early hours of that morning. He was coming home when he saw someone or two men driving Butch's car, and they were kind of messing around. The reason he noticed them was because they were messing around, playing with the music, turning it up, kind of, it looked like they didn't belong and like they were a bit excited to be there. And then they drove off in his very expensive Mercedes. Now, he didn't recognize the men at this point, but of course this is considered extremely significant information. Now, what I hadn't mentioned was that when the officers arrived at the house initially, they'd knocked on, no one had answered, but they had found wedged in the door was a sheriff's deputy card. And so they were confused as to why this was here. Obviously, at this point, no one knew that Sharon and Marie and Butch were dead. So they call the number on this card and they ask why the sheriff's deputy was there earlier that day. And he says that Butch's car has been located over 70 miles north and it had been completely destroyed. It had been burnt, set on fire. And so he was coming round to talk to Butch and see if he knew what was going on, see if his car was missing. Obviously, he knocked on, got no answer, left that card, and then left the scene. So this is, again, significant information, but doesn't really tell us anything about the suspects themselves. So meanwhile, the police officers are at the house, forensics are called in, they are really going through the house in finite detail. And they see a number of suspicious things. For one, the place has been completely ransacked. Tables are turned over, drawers are out, everything is sort of everywhere. And so initially they're thinking, maybe this was a robbery. Someone was looking for something, or maybe just looking for money. And then they come across a tape, and this tape is a recorded set of phone calls from Butch to various people in his life, one of them to his own son. And on this recorded tape, it's Butch speaking to his son. And now he's not super specific, but he does talk about being scared a bit for his life, being worried about certain things happening to him. And it's clear there's something else going on here. And there have been theories about this being related to gangs and drugs, and Butch maybe being involved in that side of things, although that's never been out and out confirmed. But we also know for a fact that Butch carried these large amounts of money. And so for Butch to have large amounts of money, for people to know about them, that was obviously a potential motive as well. And in the footage that we have from that hidden security camera, we see at one point, one of the men pulls off Butch's boots, the shoes that he's wearing. And we know that he could have kept money in his boots. It was known that sometimes he did. So the more police are learning about this, the more they're thinking, hey, maybe these people knew Butch, or certainly knew his movements, they kind of knew his routine, they knew where he stored his money. And if they were doing that, then surely someone must have seen them. And remember, they walked past that blue t-shirt outside. Well, obviously that's taken in for forensic testing. And there's a couple of significant things about this t-shirt. Firstly, where it was placed, it was right outside the front door. Odd placement. If Butch had been coming in and it was already there, wouldn't he have picked it up? Unsure. But the second thing is that it has a blood stain on it, and so that will be taken for forensic testing. And finally, it has a brand logo on it, CES. Consolidated Electrical Supply. It's this US-based wholesaler for electrical supplies. Now, they've got over 750 locations. At least that is true now in 2025. I don't know how many it was back in 1994, but it certainly was a large company. The blood from the t-shirt comes back and it is a forensic match to Sharon. We know that this was in the house when she was being murdered. But there is also some more DNA evidence on it, but this is 1994. DNA technology just isn't as advanced as it is today. And so they can't actually pull a complete DNA profile from that. So at the moment, it's kind of a dead end, but they certainly want to hold on to that, and they need to gather more evidence, but they're hoping that in the future this will come in useful. So officers then call the company that makes these CES shirts and they ask them, is there any way that you can tell us who this belonged to? Do you have records of your employees that have these shirts in this size, this kind of material, you know, anything that could identify who it belonged to? But unfortunately, the company says, no, we give out thousands of those shirts and we kind of give them out randomly. They're a bit of marketing for the company. So yes, employees have them, but also it could just be someone who has worked with the company before or who knows of the company or a family member. Unfortunately, there's no way to get that kind of specific info. And so again, it's kind of a dead end. Now, meanwhile, while all of this is going on, the police have sent the footage to the FBI and they're wanting to get a more precise, more detailed image if possible. They want to kind of enhance what they've got. And they do manage to do this. And I must say, it's not super clear, but there is definitely a still image there. And in terms of comparing it to a real person, it probably is going to come in quite useful in the future if they ever get a suspect in custody. And so they have that. And then just 2 weeks after the murder happened, the lead detective on the case gets a phone call, and it's from another police officer, and they're saying, look, we've got someone in custody you might want to talk to. There had been another home invasion, and in this case, it was a home invasion of a family. There was a very pregnant woman there, a mum-to-be, and the home invaders, the perpetrators, had come in, they had shot dead the 2 Rottweiler dogs, and we don't know what was going to happen next because thankfully one of the family members had managed to sneakily hide in the bathroom, and they'd called 911. The police had arrived, and of course the perpetrators had been taken into custody. We don't know what would have happened. If that family member hadn't escaped and called 911, we could have another set of dead bodies on our hands and a family annihilated. It's reported that one of the men doing the home invasion said to the pregnant woman, quote, "Shut the fuck up, bitch, or I'm gonna cut that baby out of your belly." And the reason the lead detective is getting a phone call about this home invasion is because one of the suspects who's been brought into custody for that home invasion looks very much like the still image from our murder scene. So detectives pay him a visit and they ask him questions about Marie, Sharon, and Butch. This man's name is Pablo Ibar. He was born in the US to a Cuban mother and a Spanish father, and he's confronted about the triple murders and asked for his alibi, and he pretty much doesn't have one. He said he wasn't anywhere near Butch's home at the time of the murder. In fact, he was out with his girlfriend at the time, but when officers said they need to confirm that, Pablo actually struggles to give his girlfriend's last name, and he can't give them a phone number either, so they can't take that as a solid alibi. Obviously, they can't confirm it. Thankfully, Pablo isn't going anywhere because he's in prison for this home invasion, and so they get Gary, who is the neighbour from Butch's neighbourhood, they get him to come and see if he can do an identification in a lineup of any of the men that he saw driving away from the scene of the crime. And immediately, without question, he identifies Pablo. And so after that, they managed to get a warrant to search Pablo's family home. So he's still got a bedroom at his mother's residence. So the police go in, they search, and whilst they're there, they're asking his mum if she can identify some pictures for them. And they don't tell her exactly what the photos are from, but they do show her that still image of the perpetrator from the murder scene. And immediately she says, yeah, that's Pablo. Now later on, she has recanted that, saying that she doesn't understand English, doesn't speak English, but it was reported, and it's in police documentation, that at the time she very much did say that this was Pablo. She also confirms that she works for this specific company, and police realised pretty early on that this company, one of their vendors is the CES company. So the shirt that was found outside the crime scene, they are a vendor of Pablo's mum's company. Now, obviously that's not concrete evidence, but it certainly is something. The reason that the police are so keen on searching Pablo's house or his mother's house is because at the crime scene, there was a bloody shoe print on one of the tiles, and it was incredibly clear. They got a really good impression from it. And so they're wanting to see if any of Pablo's shoes match that print. And so they confiscate a number of shoes. They do compare them, and nothing matches, but they are going to continue along this line. They know that that's not where Pablo lives most of the time, so they're going to want to search his actual residence. Now, they have that specific shoe print, and actually, although they don't manage to match it to Pablo, they do manage to match it to someone else, and it's someone else in custody who was in that other home invasion with Pablo. His name is Francisco Rincon. Francisco is questioned, but he swears the shoes aren't actually his. They belong to Pablo. And he says that they all live together. There's a group of them that live in this house, him, Pablo included, and they always share clothes. So it's not unusual that he would have Pablo's shoes. And so the police officers say, fine, we're going to go and search that house. That is Pablo's kind of main residence at the moment. We wanted to do that anyway. So they get a warrant and they search this apartment. They end up confiscating a number of things, including a gun case that matches the kind of gun that was seen in the CCTV footage. However, although they get this case, they don't actually get the gun. So again, it's another interesting, maybe useful piece of evidence, but it's certainly not solid in any way. They also confiscate a number of other things, including latex gloves. And we know from the CCTV footage that at least one of the men was wearing latex gloves. It's in the kind of same category as the other evidence, though. It's definitely not concrete or solid, but it is something. Perhaps the most important thing they get from that visit, though, is they end up speaking to another one of the roommates that lives in that apartment. And this man's name is Seth Penalver. And he looks eerily similar to the other perpetrator on the CCTV footage. And so they end up asking a different roommate, look, I'm going to show you these still images and I want you to tell me if you recognize them. He shows the two images and the roommate identifies, yep, that's Seth and that's Pablo. And on top of that, police go back to Casey's Nickelodeon bar and they realize that both Pablo and Seth were seen there on that night by multiple witnesses, including the bar manager himself. And so after that, Pablo and Seth are arrested on suspicion of the triple homicide. But this is where things get a little bit more complicated, because we know we have literal CCTV footage, we have positive identifications in one way or another, we have some forensic evidence as well, but a huge part of the prosecution's case relies on eyewitness testimony. And as we know, witness testimony is inherently flaky. Certainly over time, things can shift. The initial trial lasted over 9 months and actually ended in a hung jury and a mistrial. And this entire case is quite controversial in terms of the guilt of both perpetrators. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is. So officially, after more trials, Seth and Pablo were found guilty of murder and they were sentenced to death. But by 2012, there have been 4 trials. And as part of this last one, Seth is appealing and he's actually acquitted of the murders. Basically, we know that the other perpetrator took off their disguise, but the perpetrator who prosecutors think is Seth, he never took off his disguise. And so that is the kind of difficulty in this, in identifying him specifically. It's reported actually, and Debbie, Sharon's sister, speaks about this, that Seth told a cellmate of his that Pablo's biggest mistake was removing his disguise, but that didn't mean anything for him. It wasn't going to get Seth in any trouble. And Debbie thinks that, yeah, he's right, because as we know, he was eventually acquitted. And so he's released. Now, Pablo's appeal goes ahead. And as part of that, the t-shirt that was found, that is retested for DNA. And now we are much further on in our understanding of DNA and the technology that we can use. And so we actually have more data available to us in terms of this t-shirt. We know Sharon's blood was on the shirt, but now we also have confirmation that Pablo's DNA was found on the shirt too. And there is some conflicting sort of theories around that DNA. I've seen some reports that it wasn't like a full, complete DNA profile. And then I've seen other reports saying that it absolutely was. And the chances of it being someone else were 1 in 353 trillion, some wild number like that. It's actually really difficult to get down to the grips of what the police investigation found and the forensics found. But just to give you those kind of 2 pieces of information, I think that's important. What I will say is that because of the DNA evidence that was presented at trial, at least partially that's the reason, Pablo is he's found guilty again, and he's not sentenced to death this time. He's sentenced to life in prison, but he still maintains his innocence and says this is a fit-up. In fact, he says that the only reason he was arrested was because the police were looking for someone who was Latino and they focused in on him. And we know that Pablo has lied before. And in fact, in this very case, he gets his girlfriend and his sister to kind of, who knows what actually happened behind closed doors, but they say that he has an alibi. He actually was with us and something, but that alibi does not check out, and they managed to disprove it as not only completely untrue, but it is an active lie. There's conversation around they bring in a worker at a hotel to testify that this absolutely categorically could not be true because of some phone card technology. So again, we know that he's lied about this, and why you would do that if you actually had an alibi, I don't know. As for the motive, there are various theories about why this happened, and they kind of all link back to money. We know that Butch kind of flashed his money about, and there was some talk about both Pablo and Seth having sold Butch drugs, some cocaine, and then Butch taking that to his house, but Pablo and Seth following him there to steal the drugs back. And again, that's just a theory, but it is something that is mentioned again and again. So I thought it was significant to kind of talk about. I also think it's clear in this case, and the reason why there's been so many trials and retrials is because this is not an airtight case. I think there is plenty of evidence against Pablo, but in terms of physical evidence, we don't have that much. We don't have fingerprints, we don't have blood, we don't have hair. Nothing that would match Pablo. And actually his defense say that it would be almost impossible for an assailant to not leave DNA if they were committing this kind of crime. But we know that the perpetrators were wearing latex gloves and disguises. Maybe the DNA wasn't as transferable as it would be if you were just out playing with nothing on your face, with nothing on your hands. We don't know. The biggest issue I have with this case is that Seth was acquitted and Pablo is still in prison. And that's kind of seems to be Pablo's biggest thing as well. He thinks if Seth was acquitted when we were convicted on very similar evidence, then why can't I be acquitted? But of course, we know that the t-shirt evidence that comes into it shows that Pablo's DNA was at the crime scene on the t-shirt. And so I guess that is a big reason. Whether that would be enough to convict him based on the other evidence being thrown out in Seth's case, I don't know. There is something else. I couldn't find loads of information on this, but there is reportedly a letter that was written from Pablo to Seth whilst in prison, allegedly telling Seth to stop going for appeals and just man up and take what they've done. But we also know that Pablo maintains his innocence on this whole matter, so who knows his real stance on this. Look, I am firmly on the side of believing the evidence and trusting that the jury did make the right decision in this case as much as they could to the best of their abilities. But I think it's important that I tell you about everything I read about and not just the side that is the guilt verdict, because there is a lot of controversy around this case. And there was I think 6-part documentary that kind of looks into this in more detail. And coming out of that, it's not clear which way this case falls. And so when we take into account everything we have in this case, I'm interested to know, what do you think? Do you think the right man is behind bars? Do you think Seth was wrongfully acquitted? Or do you think an innocent man is behind bars and actually it was someone else? There was recently, actually I think it was November of this year, so super recently, a new witness has come to light who says that they can actually identify the real perpetrators in this case. They didn't come forward before because of various reasons, probably being scared, because it looks like the people they're saying actually committed these crimes were involved in gangs, and so they didn't want to come forward before. We will see if that actually changes anything for Pablo, if that actually comes to the forefront. In the official documents that I read, they are not named, so I don't have a huge amount of info about that, but of course, if anything comes up, I will update you as soon as I know. There is an incredibly moving article from Debbie, Sharon's sister, about the kind of this whole event, everything that's happened, all of the many trials after, and the effect it's had on her and her life. And she makes an important point about the testimony at trials, witness testimony. People's memories change, people die. Juries aren't hearing the same witness testimony every single time. And as we know, witness testimony was a large basis for this case. What's clear about this case is that we're missing large chunks. And unfortunately, that CCTV footage that we thought was so integral and important at the start might not be as useful as we had hoped. It seems there's a worry, at least on Debbie's side, that one of these days, Pablo will be released, just as Seth was. And if that happens, she feels that she will never get the justice that she and her sister truly deserve.